Hey everybody, sorry about the technical difficulties. We started out on a different video stream and the sound wasn't working. So we're gonna start again here. I just wanna welcome you. I am Julie and this is Joel. We are the pastors at Resurrection City Church. And we are really glad that you're able to join us this morning online. We know that we would love to be gathering in person, but due to the special circumstances that we find ourselves in, we are just really thankful to have technology and to still be able to come together this morning. So thanks for watching with us. Whether you're watching it live or whether you're tuning in later, we're really glad that you are able to join us. Wow, it's been a crazy week. And so I just wanted to start out by acknowledging that and just saying, if you are feeling anxious or uncertain or confused about how to think about everything that's going on, that's totally understandable, right? This is a new situation that we find ourselves in. And oftentimes anxiety is our body's way of letting us know that something isn't right. And this isn't right. We weren't meant to live in a world where this is what was happening. And so we know we live in a broken world and that this is a problem, but we also know that we have hope and that we can choose to look at it in a different way. And so Joel's going to talk today a little bit about just 3 reflections on how we should think about what's going on in our world. So just want to welcome you again and say, if you are feeling anxious this morning, if you are wondering, how do I respond to this? What do I do? Hopefully you've come to the right place to at least start that discussion and to kind of think about what the Bible and what Scripture has to say about all of that. Before we get into that, though, I want to give a few quick announcements. One, our community groups will be meeting virtually this week, so look for more information from me on that. Leaders, you'll be getting an email from me soon, just kind of giving some ideas and tips on how to connect virtually this week with your groups. And some people have asked us, like, how long do you think we'll be in this online way of doing church? And to be entirely honestly with you, we don't know. We're not entirely sure what's going on or how long it will last, but we are trying to use wisdom and to follow the Minnesota Department of Health's recommendations. And so we will keep all of you posted. Please continue to check your email from us, and we'll also post any updates on social media if you are on social media. Second update is just that if you are sad about missing the worshiping together through song this morning, Zach, our worship leader, has put together a playlist of our worship music, and I will link to that in the video notes, and I'll also post it later today. So it's a great way to continue to worship while we're not able to gather corporately and do it in person. But we wanted to still give you an opportunity to worship through song in your own way at home, if that's possible. And then lastly, we know that there are going to be communities and people in our community who are impacted more strongly by everything that's going on. And so we want to, as a church, come together and find ways to best support those people, to help them to be a light in the midst of this difficult and challenging time. And so we have one opportunity that we are hoping to kind of come together as a church to do. And so I'm going to share a little bit about that at the very end. So stay tuned. And after Joel is done, I'm going to come back and just give a quick update on different ways that you can still help people in our community through this time. So I'm going to pass it off to Joel, and I'm going to work on getting this video in the correct spot. Yeah. So, well, I need to use your laptop, if that's okay.
All right. I'm going to switch things up here a little bit. So, like Julie said, this has been kind of a crazy week. I feel like the last few days are. I can't think of anything in my life that is comparable, and you might be feeling that way too. Obviously, none of us have lived through a pandemic before. We've had a few scares like this in the past, I think. But I know a lot of people compare this to the Spanish flu, and that happened in like 1918 or 1919. So obviously, none of us were alive. Hardly anyone around now was alive during that time. And so, yeah, it feels kind of overwhelming. We feel that way too. Julie and I do a little bit. And so it's totally understandable if that's where you're at right now too. You're not alone. I think that's a pretty normal thing to feel overwhelmed. And it's not a bad thing. I actually want to talk a little bit about why that feeling can be kind of a good thing. So like Julie said, I had just kind of three thoughts, three reflections I had, and three things I want you guys to ponder throughout the week as well, as a way to kind of respond to just the craziness that's going on right now. So the first thing that I want you guys to just kind of be pondering, something I've been thinking about, is not being claimed by the moment. Like Julie said, we're not saying to be ignorant or ignorantly blissful, but feeling some anxiety doesn't mean you need to be claimed by fear. And let's just think about like why this is such a crazy moment, why we might feel anxiety or fear, why we might feel so like destabilized. And I think a big reason is because more than any generation, I think we think that through planning, through dedication, that we can sort of create for ourselves long, healthy lives and enjoy the works of our hands. And so it's a shock for us when we find that there are, like, instead of thinking of our lives in terms of like years and decades, right? Like putting in healthy patterns, eating healthy, working out, keeping ourselves safe from sickness by getting flu vaccine every year. Like we do all these different things that we put around ourselves to kind of control our health. And that feels like it's been kind of taken away from us, and that can feel really destabilizing to have to think instead of years and decades about our lives and our health. Now we're having to think in days and weeks instead, and we have all this uncertainty about what's going to happen. How fast is this virus going to spread? How much is it going to mess up our lives if we get it? How do we keep ourselves from getting it? It sounds like it's a really easy virus to catch, and that just is a really destabilizing thing. And despite our best efforts at healthy patterns right now, we haven't mastered this virus. We're looking at a vaccine that's like a year out, and that's just like a scary thing for us. And so that kind of like veneer of safety that we often feel like we have through being able to control our lives and our health through healthy patterns, we feel like that's been kind of taken away from us, and that is like something we're feeling, and that can lead to panic and like a kind of overwhelming anxiety that can claim us. Now that's the response of some. Maybe a response though that you're feeling is actually the opposite, to just like, oh, I'm just going to pretend everything's fine, everything's normal, we don't need to worry about anything, and like we want to kind of double down on the normal assumption that we have, that everything is fine, everything is going to work out, that if you just work hard enough, then you can make sure that everything is going to be fine. And like all of this is overblown and people are overacting, and this hysteria is just going to be gone in a week or two. I'm sure, maybe you're feeling that, or you for sure like maybe know people who are feeling that. I actually think that's just a different kind of being claimed by the moment, actually. I think it's just kind of, it comes out of the same fear and uncertainty, but it's just a different response to it. Except now it's just kind of manifesting in sort of like an ignorance, or kind of like a bravado that says we can easily conquer this thing. I think that's just another coping mechanism to fear. And I think we gotta like really embrace the fact that this is a scary time, whether or not you want to admit it, and we should take stock of the gravity of the situation. We shouldn't be ignorant. I don't think that's the right response either. Okay, so you're probably either leaning towards one of those two things right now, if not outright full blown in one of those two things. And I want to encourage you with not being swallowed up by anxiety right now or with ignorance, but let's lean into this sort of kind of revelation of our helplessness and see it as an opportunity to reacquaint ourselves with the hope of Jesus. I think if we're honest, this time reveals to us that things aren't timeless, they're not perfect as we think that they are. And we can either get angry at that, or we can sort of try to reclaim the moment and be thankful, try to see this situation as something to be thankful for, because it reminds us of something. Charles Spurgeon, he's an old Baptist British preacher from like the 1800s. He's really popular. Some people really love this guy because he's always good for like a good quote. And he has a great line that's always stuck with me since I first heard it in college. He says, "I have learned to kiss the waves that throw me up against the rock of ages." Let me read that again. "I have learned to kiss the waves that throw me up against the rock of ages." So Spurgeon is someone who's well acquainted with hardship. He actually suffered from intense depression. He wrote a lot about that. That was like a really big part of his life. And his response to that constant anxiety and depression was to not fear it or to pretend it didn't exist, not to go down either of those routes, but instead he tried to take that as an opportunity to turn himself back to Jesus and remind himself of his sort of constant need and dependence upon Jesus for his life and his hope. He couldn't put it in other things. He didn't have a sort of false understanding that he could place his hope in being able to like manage his anxiety and depression just by like working hard enough or putting a certain plan in place. He knew that he could see that as an opportunity to the hardship that he was facing to kind of look back, because it threw him back upon the rock of ages, upon Jesus. And that's kind of the second reflection that I want to talk about today. I think that leads well to the second thing. Instead of being claimed by the moment, let's be claimed by Jesus instead. Let's kind of take that from Spurgeon. Okay, so let's just kind of pause and reflect, right? We've had only a couple of days really to really think about what's going on in the moment we're in. And it feels like to us like the situation is kind of unprecedented. Like you in your experience have never experienced anything like this, and we don't know how this will compare to other epidemics or pandemics in history. But if you just kind of pause and look back at the rest of human history, like you'll find a world where a vaccine for a scary disease not existing is actually a pretty normal state of affairs for humans. So let's go back to the Gospels. We're in a gospel right now, in the Gospel of John. In the Gospels, in the book of John and in other Gospels as well, even more so, in fact, than the other three Gospels, we regularly are meeting people who are ill with different diseases. Sometimes these people are actually quarantined, we find out. That's what happened to people with leprosy in the Bible because of their illnesses. But even if they were, Jesus would have run into people with sickness all the time. And what we know about the ancient world is that it's just full of filth and insects and crowding. That's what I read in one book. And the author says, like the constant companion of filth, insects, and overcrowding, people jamming themselves into cities, is disease. It always accompanies these three things. And if you throw in the fact that there are no antibiotics, there's not even soap, and not even like a really understanding of germs or viruses, you have like a literal cesspool. And so because of that, there is in the Greco-Roman world, this is from an author of a book I'm going to reference here a little bit more in just a second by a guy named Rodney Stark. He says that the Greco-Roman world was periodically struck not only by deadly epidemics, but by illness and physical affliction were probably the dominant features of daily life in this era. Let me read that again. Just think about what I'm reading. The Greco-Roman world was periodically struck by not only deadly epidemics, but illness and physical affliction were probably the dominant features of life in this area. So the fear that we might be feeling right now, the experience that we're having right now of sort of destabilization and not really knowing what's going to happen because we can't predict what different viruses or germs or bacteria are going to do. That's the situation that Jesus finds himself in. And I think it's good for us to kind of think about the fact that this is the world that God chose to take on flesh and to enter into. The world that he wraps himself in human flesh to enter into, to sort of expose himself to these diseases, these epidemics that are around. That's the world that he chose to enter into. And so he's entering into a group of people for which there's a daily fear of any number of coronavirus-like diseases. The life expectancy in this time is not very long compared to what we have today, and most people are living just day to day. They don't think in terms of decades, decade to decade, like we do. That's what we think of a normal thing. Is we think in long-term plans, like I said before. That's not true of the people, for most of the people at least, that live in the world that Jesus enters into. And so because of this is a group of people that are constantly hoping for God to show up and to do away with the current order of things. Now, when Jesus does show up, it would make sense to us, right? Knowing something about diseases and germs and what the proper responses to those things are, it would make sense for Jesus to show up and to steer clear of those diseases. Maybe he would teach people, again, he's God, so he would know what you should do. He would teach people how to wash their hands. He maybe show them this cool invention called soap. He'd make sure that they, quarantine themselves for a few days. And then after all of that, he'd maybe say, yeah, okay, you can come on over here and I'll give you the gospel. But Jesus does something that's not that. He does something really extraordinary. He does something that's definitely not CDC approved right now. And that he walks right up to people and he casts away their sickness with his loving presence. That's what he's doing. N.T. Wright has a phenomenal quote that describes what Jesus is doing. Jesus comes into contact with illnesses which would normally be highly contagious, yet rather than the disease clinging to him, he seems instead to have infected the sufferer with a new wholeness. Let me read that again. Jesus comes into contact with illnesses which would normally be highly contagious, yet rather than the disease clinging to him, he seems instead to have infected the sufferer with a new wholeness. Now, of course, Jesus often cured people's diseases, but what N.T. Wright is saying there is something deeper is happening when Jesus comes into contact with people who are sick. He's infecting them with something else. And so we could call this like a counter infection of grace. Like instead of Jesus getting sick by going up to people, he gets other people sick or infected with something else. And that thing is grace. And he's infecting people with a new wholeness, which includes his vision for the world, a God's eye vision for the world and how the world actually is. And this vision is one that understands that it's sick in a way that doesn't involve viruses or bacteria or germs, but it's sick with false worship, with sin, and with self-righteousness, including the type of self-righteousness that thinks it's completely sovereign over the moment, that thinks that it has control over everything. He's infecting people with a vision for the world that sees itself as forgiven and therefore set free from this greater type of sickness. It's one that sees that Jesus is king over all the earth, all the way from governing authority, from the bodies and the people that are trying to keep us healthy right now, trying to keep this virus from spreading, all the way down to the microscopic viruses itself. That's the level of reign that Jesus has over the world. And then there's the other thing that we're infected with is a vision that has its foundation in one who suffered death, who actually died, not from a virus, but from a cross, and yet overcame it in the resurrection. And so people who are infected with grace don't need to fear death. He or she, the one who's infected with grace, doesn't need to give into both the hopeless lie that everything is just chaos and we got to fend for ourselves. It doesn't need to give into panic, the panic that we're all tempted to feel, but it also doesn't need to give into the lie that this isn't a big deal and that we're invincible, that we can just kind of go on with our daily life and not assume this is a big deal. It can really grapple with the real danger of the situation, honestly, because it doesn't have to turn fear into ignorance. Now, just like any other infection, the infection of grace has some symptoms that show in the people that are infected with it. And the two very particular symptoms I want to focus on today, those symptoms are hope and love. Okay? It's only in a dark situation that hope can truly arise. Otherwise, it's not hope. It's not going to be hope if you're, trying to tell yourself that everything is fine and you're not feeling a little bit anxious. Hope, it's not true hope if it's not coming up in the midst of actually a really dark and hard time. And this is why we shouldn't fear anxiety necessarily, because anxiety is a place where hope can arise out of. And hope in action is love. And this brings me to my final reflection here. We shouldn't quarantine the infection of grace. We should be following Jesus, and the way to follow Jesus is to have hope and love. So I want to just kind of tell you about another time in history where there was a really big disease going around, and how the Christians responded. I read this in this book, called The Rise of Christianity, a few years ago, and it's stuck with me ever since then. And ever since the coronavirus first kind of popped up in China, and we started to think that we might have to deal with it here in America, I've found myself constantly going back to this as I've thought about what we as a church should be doing in the midst of it. So, and also if you're looking for something to read here, because you're going to be, doing social distancing, maybe pick up the book Rise of Christianity by Rodney Stark. It's a really great read. It'd be a fun way to spend some time while you're hanging out. Okay. So what he does in the book is he talks about this thing called the Plague of Galen. It was about 165 AD. And it was apparently so bad, this one plague. And like I said, plagues and diseases or epidemics are pretty common in the ancient world. But this one was particularly bad. Apparently it was so bad that one ancient writer told us that he spoke of caravans of carts and wagons that were hauling the dead from the cities every day. And apparently at the height of this plague, as many as 5,000 people a day were dying just in the city of Rome alone. Okay, so just think about the scale of that. And for context, the city of Rome probably had around 1 million residents in it. So at its height, 5,000 people a day are dying just in that one city alone. It's kind of incredible. Now, in this ancient context, we find out that Christians thrived. Christianity itself sort of thrived and really grew because of this epidemic. And the pagans definitely did not thrive. That's kind of one of the things he draws out in the book. And the reason why, he says, is it all starts with the beliefs of the Christians. The belief that centers on a crucified and risen Messiah, that has a really good understanding and category for suffering. It had explanations and then steps for the people who believed it to take when evil struck. They were expecting it, and they had a plan for what to do when evil happened. All other views we read at the time didn't really have that. And so because the Christians could look at the plague with hope, knowing that they didn't need to fear death and believing that hardships gave them an opportunity to grow their faith, actually, they didn't see the disease as useless and as something to just like avoid and run away at all costs in the name of self-interest. So this sort of distinctly Christian faith gave them a category for how to respond to the plague and a means to act. And so the Christians responded. We read that the way that the Christians responded, we have several Christian authors that write about what the response was at the time. They responded by actually throwing themselves into the care of the sick and trying to stop the disease from spreading, even though we read many, many Christians actually lost their lives in the service of it. But they didn't look like at the loss of their life as something to necessarily be fearful of, because they had a hope in a risen Savior. Death was not something that death and the sort of like constant fear of dying from plagues was not something that the Christians feared in a way that everybody else did. And so they were insulated, not from the virus, but they were insulated from the panic because of the belief that they had. And so really, we see this too, that the first real humanitarian missions in human history are showing up because Christians are running into the cities to help those that are diseased. In fact, the pagan emperor Julian, who just hated Christianity, but even though he hated Christians, he was trying to emulate them. But he couldn't get his pagan priests to do the same because that religion didn't have any prescription for action or any category for evil, what to do. And so, in the midst of all this, in this book, Rodney Stark details how Christianity actually thrived and then actually spread because of the epidemic, because of the Christians who embodied hope and love in the midst of this panic and crippling fear. So right now, many people are not infected with hope, but with hopelessness. And without hope, there can't be love. But since we as Christians, we're infected with grace, which has the symptom of hope and love, we can respond like those early Christians by trying to run out, to not seeing this as something to fear, but as a call to action, sort of to try to be a force for good in the society. And for us at Res City, and I know other churches are saying the same thing, we want to provide opportunities to meet anxiety with hope and love, to sort of be like Jesus, and to pray that and our prayer is that this coronavirus sort of gives the opportunity for the infection of grace to spread in the midst of the infection of the coronavirus. And so because of all of this, the early Christians are trying to stop the disease. We want to see this happen too. We want to try to stop this thing from being curbed. And so that's why we're not meeting this Sunday morning. That's why we're taking a break from community groups. And for the time being, we're not going to be meeting as a church on Sunday mornings. It's because we want to see this thing stop. We want to see this thing taken care of, just like the early Christians did. But we're doing that distinctly out of love, not out of self-interest and fear. Now, if you're one of those people that is kind of treating this like it's not a big deal, and you're just going to kind of go about doing your normal life as in general, I want you to challenge you to not also act out of self-interest and to practice this social distancing thing. We're asking you to not act out of self-interest and perhaps put not only yourself but others at risk by kind of going around doing stuff that might cause this coronavirus to spread. So please do what the state is asking and what your employers or your school is asking you to do as much as you can. We do want to see this thing stopped. We want to try and be a part of the solution here and trying to help to slow the spread of this. And what Julie's going to do here in just a second is she's going to give some steps that we're taking as a church to have our hope and action, our love, to manifest itself in the community. We're going to be trying to find ways to serve the community well, to try to help care for people who are affected, uniquely maybe by the spread of this virus, in the midst of also trying to keep ourselves safe, and in the midst of trying to preach hope to ourselves as a community, but also to those around us as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pray and pray for just kind of I have a prayer put together here, and then for us, for the rest of the world here with the coronavirus, and then Julie's going to kind of wrap up and talk about some of the practical steps that we're taking as a church in the midst of all this. So if you want to just close your eyes here and pray with me real quick, we'll do that, and then Julie will end it for us. I actually took this prayer from, it was a really cool Jesuit prayer that I came across this week, and I adapted kind of for us. All right, so here we go. Jesus Christ, you traveled through towns and villages, curing every disease and illness. At your command, the sick were made well. Come to our aid now, in the midst of the global spread of the coronavirus, so that we may experience your healing love. Heal those who are sick with the virus. May they regain their strength and health through quality medical care. Heal us from our fear, which prevents nations from working together and neighbors from helping one another. Heal us from our pride, which can make us claim invulnerability to a disease that knows no borders. Jesus Christ, healer of all, stay by our side in this time of uncertainty and sorrow. Be with those who have died from the virus. May they be at rest with you in your eternal peace. Be with the families of those who are sick or who have died. As they worry and grieve, defend them from illness and despair. May they know your peace. Be with the doctors, nurses, researchers, and all medical professionals who seek to heal and help those affected and who put themselves at risk in the process, including the ones who are a part of our congregation here at Res City. Because we know there are many people at Res City who as part of their work, are working to be a part of the healing here. Thank you for their willingness to put themselves at risk for others. May they know your protection and peace. Be with the leaders of all nations, whether they're Republicans or Democrats or anything else. Give them the foresight to act with charity and true concern for the well-being of the people that they are meant to serve. Give them the wisdom to invest in long-term solutions that will prepare for or prevent future outbreaks. May they know your peace as they work together to achieve it on earth. Whether we are at home or abroad, surrounded by many people suffering from this illness, or only a few, Jesus Christ, stay with us as we endure and mourn, persist and prepare. In place of our anxiety, give us your peace. Jesus Christ, heal us. We pray this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. All right, Julie.
Hello again. I just wanted to end, as Joel said, we want to be making a positive impact during this time and reaching out to help others and to show that hope and love in a really tangible way if possible. So I just wanted to give a plug for one of our partner ministries, the Sheridan Story. So many of you, we had a great group come out on Thursday night. I think we had almost 25 of you there. Helped pack food for the Sheridan Story. And so you were there, if you were there, you heard that they are preparing for a extremely high need right now with knowing that many schools will probably be canceled in the coming weeks. So what they are asking, and I will link to their blog post about this as well. But what they're asking for is, number one, they're asking for donations of money just so that they can purchase more food. They did not budget for a pandemic, as no one was planning for this. And so they are going to need a lot more resources and able to purchase the food that they need to help kids to be able to eat during this time with school closures. So if you are able, that's a great way to consider doing that, is to donate financially to the Sheridan Story so that they can continue to buy food and help fight child hunger. And then the second thing is they are going to need some extra volunteers for packing food. So they have scheduled more packing events in the month of March. So you can go, and I will link to this as well. You can sign up for one if you'd like. Again, we encourage you to be smart about this. If you are someone who has any symptoms of any virus or any sickness at all, we encourage you to stay home, as does the CDC and the Minnesota Department of Health and everybody. But if you are someone who is not coming into contact with elderly, is not someone who has a chronic condition or is going to be coming in contact with someone who has a chronic condition, if you can help, I know they are taking extra preventative measures for hygiene and sanitation and also for social distancing. So I'm not sure exactly how that works in their food packing process, but the volunteer coordinator that we met on Thursday, Holly, has assured me that they're putting extra measures in place to keep everybody safe and healthy. So if that's something you can do, I highly encourage you to check it out. And then if not, I encourage you to look around in your neighborhood, see where the needs are. I know in Roseville, the police department has scheduled a few pickup dates where they will come by to your house and pick up food, non-perishable items to restock the food shelf at the Roseville Area High School. Otherwise, I think every neighborhood is kind of having a different response. There's a group in the Hamlin Midway neighborhood called Little Hopes on Facebook that is also working to help provide food and needs for people who are most impacted by this. And so we just encourage you to be on the lookout for that, be people who are spreading love and hope during this time, during this difficult time for a lot of people. And then lastly, I just want to encourage you to stay connected to your friends and family, and including your church family during this time. Joel and I are looking for ways that we can connect with all of you digitally. So we are going to be hoping to plan some prayer events where we can pray online together. We're encouraging the community groups to meet together online continually. And if you have anything at all that you need, whether it's you need someone to help run errands or get groceries for you, or if you just need prayer or someone to talk to, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I will put our email addresses and in the link in this video as well. And you can always contact us at any time, email or phone. We're here for you, and we want to come alongside you as you process everything that's going on. So we love you guys, and we're really, again, thankful that we had the chance to meet with you virtually this morning or whenever you watch this video, and we hope to see you all again very soon.